Welcome to Private Club Radio, your weekly source for industry education, news and discussion. Broadcasting from Tampa, Florida, ladies and gentlemen, here is your host, Gabriel Aloisi.
Great to be back with you another Monday here on Private Club Radio. We have a fantastic guest. Charles Dorn, Managing Director of the Dorn Group, is going to join us to discuss leadership. We're also going to get into hiring. How do you hire the right team and how do you get the top talent at your club? And he's going to discuss some of the major food and beverage trends happening right now that you need to know about. So stay tuned for Charles. Going to be a fantastic interview there. I'm fresh back from South America. I went to Quito, Ecuador. My wife is from Ecuador, and I attended the Fiestas de Quito. So I got a little Latin American culture last week. Really had a lot of fun. Went to some bullfights. I checked out a South American soccer game, which I recommend each and every person experiences once in their life. There's nothing like going to a soccer match in South America, hearing the drum beats and the, quite frankly, rabid fans that attend these matches. It was quite the experience, but it's great to be home. I think I found that a 5-day vacation is my ideal vacation, and this was 8 days. We went to Panama as well, and it was just a little bit too long. I'm ready to be back home here, back to work, working with some great private clubs across the country and enjoying that. And of course, this show. So great to be back here with you guys. Now, I want to make sure that I talk to you about next week, because next week will be the Private Club Radio Show's 50th episode 50. Really excited about that. I can't believe that I've gotten through 50 episodes and not missed one at this point, but every single Monday I've been able to bring you guys an episode. Really delighted to do that. And thank you for listening to the episodes. And we have a lot of great listeners who I think have listened to all 50 at this point. So really special, and going to be doing some special things. I have some announcements to make, some new things we're doing here at Private Club Radio and at the Private Club Agency. I'm going to share some stats with you because 50 being a big milestone, I think it's time to kind of show you the reach and impact this show has had. Going to share some stories, some things that have happened on this show. I've got a lot of guests and listeners who have written me, and I want to share you some of the things that they've said. So I think we're going to have a lot of fun. Just make sure to join us back here next Monday for episode number 50 of the Private Club Radio Show. One last announcement to make for you. I want to remind you that the time is drawing near to sign up for the Private Club Radio webinar featuring Michael Crandall happening on January 4th. You do not want to miss this. Especially if you're a general manager of a club, these are going to be Michael's top secrets to keep a successful club and career on track. He's going to be sharing with you his wealth of knowledge from his many, many years of industry experience running some of the most exclusive clubs around the country, including Exmoor and the Thunderbird Country Club. So make sure to go to privateclubradio.com/education. You can learn more about it there and sign up. You do not have much time. Make this your Christmas present to yourself or your Hanukkah present to yourself. Make it your Kwanzaa present to yourself. Whatever the case may be, make sure that you attend this thing. It's going to be one of those things that people will be talking about for a long time. I know that. Well, it's time to bring Charles on the show. I'm joined today by Charles D. Dorn, CCM. He's the Managing Director of the Dorn Group, Ltd. Charles Dorn has more than 35 years of experience in the field, having spent 12 years as general manager of the Union Club of the City of New York. His private club experience includes the Chemist Club as general manager, the Petroleum Club of Anchorage also as manager, and the Stock Exchange Luncheon Club as assistant manager. Dorn's experience also includes the Rye Town Hilton, Meadowlands Hilton, Guyan Golf and Country Club, and Parker Meridian Hotel. Charles has completed consulting projects for various clients throughout the world. Clients have included Windows on the World, Madison Square Garden, Lantana Beach Club in Bermuda, Plantation Bay Hotel and Casino in Aruba, and Fiesta America's Coral Beach Hotel. For 6 years, Charles served as managing director of the City of New York chapter and has served on various CMAA national committees. For many years, Dorn has been involved in hospitality education. He serves as chairman of the Dean's Advisory Board at the Hilton College and serves as adjunct faculty member at the Preston Robert Tisch Center for Hospitality, Tourism, and Sports Management at New York University. He has served on the Business Council of the University of New Haven's hotel program and has lectured at Cornell University, New York City Technical College, and the Vocational Foundation in New York. Well, that's quite a mouthful, but great to have you on, Charles. Welcome to Private Club Radio.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Charles, it's wonderful. We want to get into a few topics today. We're going to discuss some things about leadership. We're going to talk about hiring, and I want to get into recent trends in club food and beverage with you. So let's start out with the first topic, which is leadership. There are some traits that really make a great leader. What are those for you, Charles?
Well, there are certainly a number of them. Let me start by saying I think that the great leaders listen. And if there were one trait that they have, it's the ability to listen. They listen to all those around them. They listen to members. They listen to employees. They listen to all the different sources available to them, and they absorb information and utilize it in all sorts of different ways.
Perfect. And what would you consider to be the second main leadership trait that's out there?
Well, I think that great leaders surround themselves with great staff. That doesn't necessarily mean the most tenured staff. It doesn't mean the person that has been around the longest or the person that has the most remarkable resume. They surround themselves with people that constantly cause them to think. There's that old adage, if you're a great manager, you hire the person that is going to replace you. And I firmly believe that. Certainly, those staff come from all sorts of different areas, and we'll talk about that when we get into hiring the right team and top talent.
What's number 3 on your list, Charles?
Number 3 is the need to allocate resources. It's really difficult. You hire great people, and then you don't give them the tools to succeed. And the tools can be different in every case, of course. Every person is different, as we all know. And as we treat different people different ways, we need to give them the specific tools to do their jobs. So when you put a set of handcuffs on somebody and don't let them do their job, whether it's too centralized a type of management or the inability to let them develop, you're not helping yourself. And those folks are the success of your business, and in this case, clubs, moving forward. Members want to have the people around them that know the best, that know the trends, that know the best restaurants, et cetera, et cetera. And when you hamper them and don't let them do their jobs, frankly, you're barking up the wrong tree.
That makes sense. Now, if I'm a club that just doesn't necessarily have access to a ton of resources, whether that's capital or otherwise, what ways could you still foster that without, maybe having everything that you'd want to have as a manager?
Valid question. Certainly, not every club has the depth and the breadth of resources available, but I'm even talking about the things that are available to all of us. So I'm constantly amazed when I don't find, or when I find managers who, frankly, have never looked at CMAA University. There is such a depth of training materials out on CMA University. The ability to get involved in a professional association. CMA is not the least, or not the most expensive. They're also not the least expensive. But that being said, there are so many things within your CMA membership that you can do. The ability to pick up the phone and call another manager who you respect, or go talk to a restaurant manager. We're not talking about giving somebody thousands of dollars of actual resources. Sometimes it's a matter of giving them time. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we have conferences and meetings and schedules, and then I find out that, oh, no, I didn't go just because I had a house committee meeting. Well, I'm not negating the value of that house committee meeting, and certainly I'm not suggesting you jeopardize your job. But if you're the assistant manager and you skip a house committee meeting in January and your club is philosophically closed for the first quarter of the year, it's not going to hurt you.
Right.
So don't, as the manager, say, he or she has to be at every single House committee meeting. I'm constantly amazed at the number of members and managers we see at CMAA who just don't go to meetings, and their excuses are tenfold. Oh, well, I don't have time. Oh, my XYZ committee always meets on such and such a day.
Right.
You have to make time.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I know a guy here in Tampa who's a productivity expert. He's been helping a group of us kind of figure out, how to manage your time. There's things that you can be doing that are actually going to move your career or your business forward, and there's things that aren't. And you got to put priorities first.
There have always been theories to that gentleman's point. There have always been theories about how you utilize your time, and probably the person that was the most philosophical about it was Greg Patterson, or is Greg Patterson. And Greg would always tell you that it won't work for everybody, but he spent the majority of his early morning hours before he came to work doing his paperwork. And, that's the way Greg worked. And so he never felt locked into his desk to do paperwork when members were around. Now, not everybody has that luxury, and not everybody's going to get up at 4:00 in the morning. Right. But there are people who believe that you have to answer your emails every 2 seconds. And I'm not sure I agree with that. I think that, yes, we live in a society where we have to respond and communicate quickly, but in a lot of cases, it can wait 15 minutes. It can wait a half an hour because you choose to go out and be in your dining room, or go out and have lunch with somebody to see a hot new restaurant, whatever it is.
Right. Yeah, you got to put the important things first. And I'll be the first to admit that I'm an offender when it comes to constantly checking my email. But I have gone through periods where I'll say I'm only going to check it twice a day at this time and that time. And I will.
When you figure out how to do that, would you call me? It never quite worked. It's a great idea, but it never worked.
It didn't last as long as I wanted to. Yeah, it didn't last.
Well, it's even worse when you have clients and you're a consultant, believe me.
Sure.
Sometimes they think that you're ignoring them when you don't answer them in 15 minutes, but I've actually taken to the point that I don't answer them sometimes. Yeah. I don't answer them at 11 o'clock at night because I don't want them to think that I'm available to them 24/7.
Right. I have another friend. He's like a software developer, so he's a very logical thinker. And what he's actually done is on his email signature, he'll just say, I answer emails at this time and this time and this time. And if you don't hear from me before then, you're going to just have to wait, basically. He says it in a really nice way, but it works for him.
Right.
And I admire that. And it's not necessarily a bad idea because so many people get caught up in email. It's really a burden. But I like the idea of getting that done early in the morning.
When I do my syllabuses at NYU every semester, my syllabus, I sit down with the students and I look them in the eye and I say, don't expect that I'm going to answer your email at 3:00 in the morning. Yep. We're going to treat this like a business relationship. And I actually say on my syllabus that I'll answer you within 24 hours. And of course, for the most part, I do answer more often than that.
Sure.
But they need to be taught that we're not in their world in that sense.
Right. Absolutely. Well, let's move on to your next point here in terms of leadership. What's the next trait on your list there, Charles?
Well, I think the next one is ethics. We have to remember as managers, as leaders of businesses, that we are dealing with other people's money. We are dealing with being the figurehead in the club, and we set the tone. And, unfortunately, there are scenarios that occur all the time. We all know what they are. But we have to remember it's not our decision. We are the stewards. And I know sometimes people get offended by that concept, but we are the stewards of these businesses. And we don't have the ability to go out and to abuse that privilege. And unfortunately, we do. Sometimes we'll walk into a club and the manager will be sitting in the best seat in the dining room. And I look at that and I'm stunned by that. If you have a former president who walks in or a current president who walks in and you're sitting at the prime seat in the dining room, what's that say about you? Right. It means you have an ego, and egos need to get checked at the door.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you work on that? I mean, I think we all inherently have some sort of an ego, or especially people who have gotten to the position that they're in. It comes naturally. Is there any kind of shortcuts or any tricks that some hacks, if you will, of how to work on being a little more personable and thinking about others, or is it just something that's ingrained in people one way or the other?
Well, I think the one thing that we constantly all have to do is we have to look at it from the other side. We have to look at it as what perception do members have of us. Mm-hmm. And so, everything we do members are going to see differently than we do. And so I remember many years ago, actually my first management class in college, the professor said to us, if you learn one thing from this class, it's the ability to actually see things from the other side, see what employees hear when you say something, what members will see when you do something. And it becomes, if you start to think about that, especially as a young manager, it becomes ingrained in you.
Sure.
So when you, using the example I used a second ago, when somebody is sitting at that best table in the dining room and everybody sees you, looking at it from a member perspective, it should shoot all sorts of red flags up. Not saying you're going to change your behavior tomorrow, but when you start to think about that, when you have a staff meeting and something comes across the wrong way and later on you realize what you said, hopefully you learn from that. And like I said, it becomes ingrained in your thinking that there's two sides to every equation.
Right. Yeah, I think of the word empathy when describing what you're talking about here. And one thing I've known that sort of worked for me at least, and I'm not sure it would work for everybody, but I try to volunteer some of my time when I can, and just sort of getting down with in the dirty trenches with people. You kind of just start to learn about people and start to not take everybody at face value, but really get to know somebody. And I think that's one way to really build that skill.
I couldn't agree with you more. I remember that New York is sometimes a little difficult because a lot of the clubs, the vast majority of the clubs are union clubs, and so we can't get in and work in the trenches, kind of the way that you mentioned. But I know that I remember an incident a couple of years after I started that the gentleman in our dish room, there were constantly problems with the machine, and I just had a hunch. And so one day I walked in the chef's office and took off my coat and took my cufflinks out and rolled up my sleeves, and everybody was watching me in the kitchen. And I walked over to the dish pit and proceeded to take the dish machine apart.
Wow.
And I took it apart the way I was trained a number of years ago. And I looked at the gentlemen that were working there, and I said, I'm done with the excuses that the machine's broken.
Right.
The machine's not broken. You're not cleaning it properly. Yep. And of course, I did it in such a way that it wasn't insulting to them. But the fact that I was able to walk in there and do it bought me a lot of brownie points.
Yeah, I bet.
Same thing after a number of years. Again, general managers at the union club don't carry trays. It's a union issue, and it's fine. But one night I walked in the kitchen, and they were in the weeds, and I picked up a tray of 6 or 7 dinners, and I took them out and went up to the waiter and said, where do you want these? And he put them down. And the dining room kind of came to a little bit of a stop because everybody was kind of fascinated with the fact the general manager had it.
The
next day, the union shop steward walked into my office and thanked me. He said, we really were in the weeds.
Yep.
Same kind of thing. And it sounds like such a picayune little example because in most clubs, a manager will pick up a tray. But in our scenario, I couldn't. And I waited until the right time to do it.
Sure. And beyond the club setting, I think even just getting out into the community and volunteering at some local charities and things like that, just getting to get to know more people and really have a love for people, I think is important, of course, in this business.
Well, I will say, and I'll put my New York City club manager's hat on. The New York City chapter has recently embarked on a few projects to do exactly that. And it's not always about the club business, but we're working with a veterans group right now just to get letters to veterans all around the world.
Oh, that's nice.
Warriors.
Yeah.
We've done a couple of major projects, and it's not just always food and beverage. It's not just veterans. And really have done a ton of stuff. And that stuff, to your point, goes a long way. I've done the Habitat for Humanity thing, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't mean to belittle it at all. But it's pretty humbling when you're standing there, putting siding up on the side of a house, and you're thinking, wow, somebody trusts me with a nail gun. That's really scary. But the fact is that the people that are going to live in this house are working on this house with you.
Right.
And you realize what you have and they don't. Yep. And it's a sobering thing.
Yeah. I think that's great when we're talking about ego for sure. All right, well, let's move on to the next thing on your list there in terms of leadership.
So the next thing is what I call decentralized leaders. The really good leaders that I've met and worked with through the years and read about are people that let their staff do their job. They're not micromanagers. Of course, they're going to make mistakes. Of course, they're going to check up on them. But the fact is, we've hired these great people to do their jobs, and why would we micromanage?
Right.
I think the hardest situation I see is general managers of clubs who came up as chefs. And some of them do it really well. They realized that was 10 years ago. That was 15 years ago. I'm not a chef anymore. I came up that way. Yes, I can walk in the kitchen and see when a sauce is broken that maybe not everybody can see, and I know how to fix it, but I'm not going to go in there and look over the chef's shoulder every single time. Right. The gentleman that I replaced at the Union Club was a former executive chef, and he actually went in the kitchen every single day and tasted every single sauce and then said to the chef, I don't like this one. Well, he was a wonderful man. Unfortunately, he's passed away. Yeah. But that's not the way to do things. The fact is, let the chef do, or anybody else, do his or her job. And you know what? When they stumble, you pick them up or you kick them in the proverbial derriere. But you certainly need to let them do the things they need to do to achieve their jobs and to take their department, their area to the next level.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. Although one point I'd make here, or really kind of ask you, you're a professor there at some of those universities and hospitality schools. And so you're dealing with this new generation, the millennials, and they're really, to me, very different. And actually, I'm a millennial. I'm right on the cusp, believe it or not. But, I think there's a mindset here where they almost want to be I wouldn't say micromanaged, but they want a lot of oversight and a lot of like hand holding and a lot of pats on the back. So how are things shifting in terms of leadership when we're talking about this new generation, and how should people start to be reacting? Because these are the people that are managers are going to be managing here for a long time.
Well, I think this comment is probably going to come out overly simplistic, but the fact is that we've been dealing with this since the day we started talking about leadership, long before you and I were around. The fact is that every single person needs to get managed differently. And great managers and great leaders, and we all know the difference between the two, great leaders recognize that. And there are certainly 87,000 different tests out there. You can take the DISC method or whichever one you want. The fact is, we all know that every person needs to be dealt with differently. And so the fact that millennials need to be treated differently is in some ways no different than if you were going back to the days of food and beverage with the chefs of the world who yelled, screamed, and hollered. Everybody gets done differently. In that case, for example, if you were a manager and you had one of those chefs, you knew that it would not be a good idea to walk in your kitchen on Saturday night when there's 100 tickets on the line and complain about something, because he would probably, and I say he definitely, because there were no women in that scenario at all, he would actually throw a tantrum. And it would wreck the rhythm of the kitchen. So you learned as a manager that you went to the chef on Monday, Monday morning at 11 o'clock to talk about the problems of Saturday night at 8 o'clock. It's no different. It's no different with millennials in that sense. They need to be treated differently. Your point is well taken. They do need encouragement. They do like to be stroked. They do like a little more hand holding. But again, like I said, if you have 10 people on your management staff, you're treating all 10 of them differently without regards to whether they're millennials. You're treating them the way that each one of them needs to be treated to go to that next level, to do their best.
Right. Oh, perfect. Well, that's what I wanted to find out from you. That's great advice. And is there one more point here in terms of leadership before we move on to hiring?
There is, and this is not going to certainly surprise anybody, but I think great leaders have vision. They can think ahead of the box, and I often say this is the difference between great managers and great leaders. Great managers can do the job. Great leaders can envision where we're going in the future, and it may very well be a young department head who thinks that food and beverage revenue in this particular area is $500,000, and his or her goal while they're at the club is to raise it to $600,000, or his or her goal is to improve the caliber of service, and they have a sense of how to get there. And of course, in a general manager's role, they're the ones that drive the bus for the club. And I know that some board people, whether it be officers or members of the board will think differently about this. But frankly, the successful club managers are the ones that really drive the bus.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones that plant the ideas. They're the ones that go to different events and they see different things and they say, hey, this will work in our club. Or they see that golf has over the years waned. How can we start to move our club in a different direction? How can we start to take advantage of the fact that tennis is an up-and-coming sport, et cetera, et cetera? How do we add more amenities? Well, that stuff just doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
They're the ones that have the vision that go out there and say, we need to develop a strategic plan. We need to develop a mission statement so our employees know we can't hold our employees accountable until they, in fact, have goals. And so they're thinking, 5 steps ahead, 6 steps ahead.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not verbalized. Sometimes it's just the things they do and the things they say.
Right. And I think to your earlier points, I mean, it's all those other things that get in the way of having vision. So if you're stuck in the weeds, if you're micromanaging, if you've got a big ego, those are all things that get in the way of actually having a vision. So I actually love that you ended on that one because that's perfect.
Well, thank you.
So Charles, in terms of leadership, I know you've got some great book recommendations. What are those?
Well, this is actually really easy and a real passion of mine. I love to read, but I will be totally blunt and tell you that as much as I love people like Jim Collins and some of the incredible books, Good to Great, they're not the easiest reading. And at the end of the day, if I go to read something like that, I fall asleep. Mm-hmm. So I found 3 books that don't put me to sleep. Number one is a book that's still in print called Moments of Truth. It was written by a guy by the name of Jan Carlson. Jan Carlson was the chief executive officer of the old Scandinavian Airlines, SAS.
Okay.
And he managed to turn SAS from one of the worst rated airlines to one of the best rated airlines in a very short amount of time. It's a very short book, but he talks about some of the ways he does it. And the basic premise is that each of these customer interactions with a guest is a moment of truth. Mm-hmm. And it's reversing the pyramid, the traditional management pyramid. So basically, he puts himself at the bottom and he puts his line employees at the top. Great, easy reading. Mm-hmm. The second book that probably everybody in this crowd has read, but I can't emphasize it enough, is called Setting the Table, written by Danny Meyer of Union Square Cafe, Union Square Hospitality Group. It was Danny's early book, probably 10 years into his business. And it's easy to read because it develops the restaurants and talks about all the problems and pitfalls, but it's a little bit more like reading a novel than a management book, mm-hmm. But then he intersperses the management lessons in there. And because it's our business, how he talks to employees, how he trains employees, how he hires employees, and he runs, frankly, the best restaurants in New York, some of the best in the world. That's a great book, and again, easy reading. Mm-hmm. And then the last book is a really interesting book by a guy by the name of Dave Marquette, and it's called Turn the Ship Around. And it was a book that was written. Dave Marquette was a submarine commander in the U.S. Navy, and he turned the ship he went on from the worst-ranked submarine to the best-ranked submarine, and how he did it. And he really bucked the system with regards to the U.S. Navy. And again, much like Danny Meyer's book, is written almost as a story, interspersing the stories and the things that happened to the management and leadership lessons learned. Great book. So those 3 are, like I said, they're fun and easy reading.
I love it. Thank you so much for giving us that. Well, let's segue here into hiring the right team, because having a vision, of course, you've got to have the right team and the right talent on the bus with you. So I'd love to get some of your top tips, Charles, on how to hire correctly and hire the right people.
Well, I'm going to start out with one that's going to probably sound remarkably cliche, but I'm going to start out by saying be picky. The fact is that there's a tendency in every business, doesn't matter if we're talking about the club business, anything in the hospitality industry, any business, of not being picky enough. We are looking to hire people who are going to work with our members on a day-to-day basis. And if you can't leave that person to do that, and you're worried about what they think of that person, how they act, what they look like, they haven't been coached properly, et cetera, they're probably not the right person for your operation.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are scenarios that we've all seen where someone leaves and 2 days later there's a replacement. And that replacement lasts about a week and a half. The fact is that person never should have been hired. You're better off keeping your well-trained existing staff short and letting them work a little harder and letting them do a little overtime than you are, in fact, to hiring the wrong person. A wrong person leads to kind of my second point. I'm jumping the gun here. It's that old cliche and adage about a moldy apple.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a bushel of apples and you have a moldy apple in the middle, we all know what happens. At some point, you recognize something's going on. You take all the healthy apples off the pile, and in the middle, you find this moldy apple. And every apple that's touching that moldy apple is now moldy. And it may not be moldy to the same degree, but it's been influenced by that. And so, for example, if we were to go hire a new clubhouse manager, and that clubhouse manager maybe has his or her background in country clubs, and you're hiring that person to be the clubhouse manager in a city club, and it's a totally different environment, but you thought you needed somebody, the season was beginning, and suddenly, 3 days in, you said, this person's a fish out of water. They don't understand what we do differently here, or they don't understand why this club is so different than the places they've been. You didn't do justice in the hiring process.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, turning over those rocks to find the right people is a real necessity. And I would say that certainly is the one complaint. Now, I'm a realist. Finding good people today has gotten more and more difficult. Not naive. Certainly, we've all seen it, read it. Finding great number twos, whether we're talking about clubhouse managers, whether we're talking about sous chefs, has become really, really difficult.
Why is that, in your opinion?
I think that and it goes back to probably your question about millennials earlier too. There's a belief in some of the younger, I don't want to call it generation, but some of the younger people, that it's okay to spend short amounts of time places, and I see this in particular on the sous chef side. I'll get a resume from somebody, and in the last 5 years, they've been in 6 jobs. And when I say to them, hey, that's a problem, they're like, why? I work with Chef X, and I worked for he or she for 3 months. And I said, you can't garner all the information. You can't learn enough in 3 months. Most people would suggest in 3 months, you're lucky to know where your locker is, much less know you may know the technical skills of being a clubhouse manager in a particular club, but you haven't learned anything about the culture of the club. And,
right.
And I think it's a mindset. And, more often than not, when people come to me for job information, for job advice, I say to them, you need to be in a job for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, because the people that are in those jobs for that long have garnered not just a depth of knowledge, but a respect that the person that's been there 6 months or a year doesn't necessarily garner. Right. If I look at an assistant manager and they've been at a club for 5 years and they've done a good job, that probably means they're sitting as a member of the house committee. They're sitting on the entertainment committee when the GM's not around. They're actually doing work that the GM might be doing. If somebody's been there a year, they're like the proverbial deer in the headlights.
Right.
And they really don't know what's going on.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I've noticed, at least with some people that work for me that are, these younger generations, is they think that all of a sudden they're going to be their own manager within a year, that they know everything, like you're saying. And it's unrealistic.
That's a problem that we see coming out of hotel school a lot, truthfully.
Yeah.
We see it. Kids come out of different schools and they think they're instant managers. They're not. You need to be able to go in and put your time in to learn the things that we all learned as early in our careers.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. What other tips would you have in terms of hiring the right team and getting that right top talent into your club, Charles?
Well, I certainly think that in hiring good employees in general, we need to hire people that have a diverse background. I'm always skeptical when I get an email from someone, get a resume from someone that their background is strictly the club business. So, in other words, if I see somebody that whose resume has 5 jobs on it, it doesn't matter. Maybe they've had the right length of time, 3 or 4 years, whatever. Their depth of knowledge is only the club business, and I don't mean that with any disrespect.
Yeah.
But there are things we do in other segments of the hospitality industry that are really applicable.
Mm-hmm.
So if I have the choice to hire a dining room manager, and that dining room manager has been a floor manager at a commercial restaurant in New York, he or she is well aware of every single penny they spent on labor.
Yeah.
Yet in the club business, we might have a situation where we say every Friday night we put 5 waiters on. But yet somebody coming in from outside the club business might look at that scenario and say, why do we always put 5 people on?
Mm-hmm.
The business has dropped since I've gotten here. I want to go to 4 waiters. Mm-hmm. Well, that 4 waiters in turn means we save some labor. Or we have somebody who's a chef, and chefs transitioning to the club business can be difficult at times, but yet they also come with a different depth of knowledge and a different type of knowledge.
Yeah.
They understand, that a food cost is totally different in clubs, but we tend to use things like food cost in clubs as a crutch. So when somebody says, oh, yeah, our food cost is 40%, and they're comparing it to other clubs, is a person that comes in from a commercial establishment says 40%, I'm embarrassed to see a 4 first. I'm embarrassed to see a 3 first.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not suggesting that every club immediately, lower their food cost to 32. But the fact is, I'd rather have somebody who questions everything. And so I look for people who have some sort of commercial experience as well as club experience. I got a resume recently from a chef who had been in 5 club jobs for 2 years each, and he said, I'm the perfect club chef. And I kind of chuckled to myself. I said, no, you're probably the worst, candidate for a club for just that reason. There's probably a reason you've been fired from 4 of those 5 jobs.
You think you know it all at that point, I guess?
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Any other tips?
I think the last one is, and we've kind of talked about it a little bit in the leadership section, is professional development.
Yeah.
We need to develop all our people. And so whether or not we're talking about a clubhouse manager, we're talking about a chef, whether we're talking about a front office manager, we need to give them the tools, as we talked about earlier, to succeed. And so, getting them into CMAA, getting them, if they're interested in wine, getting them involved in a sommelier society, going after the early stages of the master sommelier degree or master of wine degree. What a great thing for them, and in turn, a great thing for the club. You get somebody that really is passionate about something, and they get to work on it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've got about 5 more minutes here, Charles, and so I wanted to just kind of quickly get into some recent trends in club food and beverage and get a sense of what you're seeing out there. You're on the street, on the pulse of what's going on. I'd love to know what's happening from your perspective.
Well, I can go through these pretty quickly, and these probably won't shock a lot of people. Number one, and probably the biggest thing that we're seeing in clubs, it's inherent now in the food and beverage industry in general, of course, is sustainability. Where stuff is coming from, making sure it's the best stuff, make sure it's raised properly. I certainly don't have to waste much time on sustainability. It is the single biggest trend. Mm-hmm. It's become an integral part of food and beverage. And just yesterday, I had this conversation with my students at NYU. At some point, things stop becoming a trend, or stop being a trend, and they're mainstream.
Right.
And sustainability is as mainstream as it gets.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Certainly, the next thing I see, which is along the same lines, is the use of local product. There are clubs that have started their own farms. There are clubs that work with local farms. There are clubs that have said, I'm going to do unique things, and maybe we can only do it during our season because of the geography. Up in the Northeast, as you can imagine, we only can use farms during a growing season. No different than in Florida. Their growing season is different. We're not going to do stuff in the middle of the summer.
Yeah.
But it's hard. But yet chefs that have said, okay, I'm going to work with a local farmer and we're going to start small. They're just going to produce our potatoes and our tomatoes.
Mm-hmm.
But starting that way to recognize that this is important stuff. It's not just important for the club and the club's image. It's really important for the younger members. And you talked about millennials earlier. This is really important stuff to millennials, and this is also another area that is very quickly no longer becoming a trend and becoming mainstream.
Yeah, I agree.
I think the next point is authenticity. It used to be acceptable to put things on menus, whether they were ethnic dishes, whether they were recipes, and call them something that they really were not. And that is something that is no longer acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to do a dinner tonight, and that dinner is going to specialize in a particular authenticity, it needs to be as authentic as if you were sitting in that country or that region.
Yeah.
Members have come to expect that. They've come to expect that in commercial restaurants, and they've come to expect that in their club. And so if you're going to put an empanada on the menu, it's got to be the best empanada that rivals an empanada in another location.
Yeah, I'm going to Ecuador next week, and I'm going to be eating a lot of empanadas.
Well, then you can be the one to come make them for us afterwards.
All right, good deal. Yeah, I'll bring the recipe back with me for you.
That's great. I love it. The next point is what I call give them what they want. We are no longer in a situation where we can tell members what they want to eat. If a member wants a 4-ounce steak, we have a steak on the menu. What do we care?
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that if you normally serve a 12-ounce steak that you charge he or she 1/3 of the cost. But if that's all the person wants to eat, give them the 4 ounces of steak.
Yeah.
And then you recognize you're also probably still giving them the same starches and vegetables and sauces, et cetera. So maybe you're charging them half the price. I'm not going to sit here and talk about how people should price things, but the fact is that a member walking away having eaten what they wanted is a happy member.
Oh, definitely. And you don't want to feel like you're wasting something either. I mean, I'm that way where I think it's just ingrained in me since a kid that my mom wanted me to eat everything on my plate. And yet
exactly.
I just sort of force myself, and I feel crappy when I do that.
Well, there was an article in the New York Times recently where it was talking about New York City chefs who have their own mindset about some stuff. And I had to laugh because one of the chefs in there said he doesn't serve decaf coffee. He doesn't serve decaf coffee because he doesn't believe in it.
Okay.
Well, I'm never going to his restaurant. And I thankfully have forgotten what restaurant it is, but maybe it's not even open anymore. But the fact is that who is he to tell me that I can't have decaf coffee?
Yeah.
There are a lot of people that have coffee after 9 o'clock in the morning and they're up all night.
Yep.
I don't happen to be one of them, but it doesn't matter. So we give them, in this day and age, we give them what they want. What do we care if we're doing a grand seafood buffet and a member comes in and says, I feel like scrambled eggs? If there's somebody in the kitchen that can make scrambled eggs, and if they can't, the manager should go back and make the scrambled eggs. What do we care?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, there's a really famous steakhouse here in Tampa called Burn's.
Oh, been there.
Oh, yeah.
Been there.
I'm sure you have. They get the best wine selection in the whole world, apparently, I guess. But I love the way they do their steaks. Is it's you choose how many ounces you want. Like your point.
They do it really. They do it really interesting, as you said. Yeah. They do it by ounces. They do it by thickness.
Yep.
So on their menu, if you are someone who wants a 1-inch thick steak, you can actually say I want a 1-inch thick steak, and they will also show you what ounces. So you know.
Yeah.
They're great, and we could talk about that for hours. Incredible opportunity.
I think that's a great concept of just, more options is not a bad thing. And I think in that particular case, it doesn't, like you said, it's going to cut down on waste and everything else. So I think it's a great
absolutely. Point. I think the next point, and again, this is not going to surprise anybody, is the whole subject of allergens. We have not traditionally done a great job. A lot of clubs have done a wonderful job. But as an industry, we've just started to recognize it. And none of us are scientists. None of us know why this is. But, the fact is there's a lot of people out there that have gluten intolerance, whether they're celiac or choose to do it by their own personal choice, whether it's nuts, whether it's dairy, it doesn't matter what it is. There are a lot of people that eat without certain things, whether it's an allergy or by diet. And we have not done a great job. There are certain clubs I walk into, and I happen to be celiac, so I'm particularly aware of this. But I walk in and I say, can I have a hamburger on a gluten-free bun? Absolutely, not an issue. They have a separate fryer for French fries. It's great. And then I walk into a club the other night, perfect example, and obviously not going to say which one. And there were two managers that both have celiac, and they said to the chef, what can we eat? The chef said, oh, you can have the Caesar salad. And the person looked and said, no, we can't. It has croutons in it. Oh. And he said, oh, yeah. And then I turned to him, and the chef said, oh, you can have the chicken lollipops. And I said, chef, are those fried in the same fryer as your tempura or your tempura is not your onion rings? And he said, oh, yeah, they are. I said, then we can't eat them. Right. And there was a chef in today's world that didn't even understand the basics of gluten. Wow. I'm not suggesting that everybody can go out and bake gluten and not deal with the dairy issues, but you got to know.
Yeah, you got to know.
And he didn't know. And I'm really concerned about this. And I think this is going to be an area that we're going to see more and more problems and issues.
Yeah, and there's more allergies and things out there as well. I don't know what
exactly. If you look at the federal government having changed its regulations for ingredients on products you buy in the store today, that you now are required to show the 6 or 7 specific allergens on the end of the ingredient list. Yeah. They need to be in bold, and they need to be obvious. And so for somebody like me, it's obvious, but we don't do that in a lot of clubs. Right. And that's going to come back and haunt us.
Yeah. The other thing, I just as a diner myself, not working in the business, but eating at clubs, is I take my son to my club, for instance, or to restaurants everywhere, and the kids menu is like the most unhealthy menu. It's like everything's fried. It's like chicken tenders, mac and cheese, hamburger. It's always like the worst food. I'd love to see some trends where like the children's menus get a little bit healthier.
Well, it's really kind of funny because when I was looking at things to talk about, I was going to mention that, but I would agree with you 100%. I've seen some great clubs look at their kids menus now as a miniature version of their adult menu.
Yeah.
And so a kid can come in and a kid can have, instead of having pasta with butter on it, if that's what they want, fine. But don't even put it on the menu.
Yeah.
If the kid wants, the kid can have a 3-ounce portion of salmon with broccoli. Or, if the kid doesn't eat broccoli, he can have it with French fries. What do I care?
Yeah.
But that's what, you're eating fish. You're eating a 3-ounce piece of salmon instead of eating, like we've said, chicken nuggets,
right?
Processed chicken nuggets.
Yeah, exactly. I do have one more question for you, and that is the bucket list question, which I ask all my guests. If there's one club out there for you, Charles, that people need to see, what would it be?
Great question. I think that when you talk about clubs, you have to look sometimes at some of the bigger clubs and the things they do and how they can take those little details that we talked about and extend them across the board. And I would probably have to say the Ocean Reef Club in Florida.
Okay.
There aren't many clubs that have their own zip code, have their own airport.
It's a city.
It's a city, exactly. Everything they do at Ocean Reef, from the way they treat their guests who come or their members who come for 1 week a year to the people that live there, is at the highest of levels. And whether we're talking about Mike Leemhoos and what he's done, or even going back before then to Paul Asbury, the fact that they have a lot of people from the Northeast. And so what did they do? Started a few years ago. They brought in a skating rink so that the people from the Northeast can skate in Florida in the middle of the Christmas season, of the holidays.
Very cool.
Always thinking the next step.
Yep.
And that would certainly be the one club that comes to mind.
That's the vision that you mentioned earlier. Well, Charles, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your wisdom. How do folks find out about you, and how do they work with the Dorn Group?
Well, it's really easy. TheDornGroup.com. Easy way to contact me, and certainly can always email me at charles@thedorngroup.com, and would be willing to talk to anybody about anything they've got an interest in, whether it's executive search, whether it's consulting. Absolutely.
Perfect, Charles. Thank you so much for your wisdom here on Private Club Radio, and hope to have you back here once again in the future.
Thanks, Gabe. Appreciate it.
Well, I really enjoyed that, and I know that I now have a few more tools to work in my business, and I hope that you feel the same way after hearing Charles there talking about leadership. Don't forget to join us back here next week, episode number 50. Until then, here's to your membership success.
Just because this round is over doesn't mean you can't enjoy the 19th hole. Check out privateclubradio.com for more. Private Club Radio is brought to you by the Private Club Agency, the premier marketing and consulting firm dedicated to helping clubs increase and retain their membership. Visit privateclubagency.com to learn more.